If you ever considered buying a Porsche 911 Turbo, now might be the time to act.
During the last 8 months we saw that prices began to stabilize, and 8 months ago I even pointed out that it could be a good buying moment for buyers who don't mind a bit of risk.
Fast forwarding to the present, we can see an increasing amount of evidence that prices bottomed and potentially are turning up. If you're still on the sidelines waiting, it might be time to pull the trigger and get that 911 before it's too late.
Let me show you what I mean.
We can see, for example, that the depreciation rate in the 991.2 Turbo S and base market are decreasing rapidly. S's lost only 2.9% or $5,200 during last year, while this is 3.8% or $6,200 for the base model. Both numbers are significant deviations from the correction that we saw in the second half of 2022. Note though that the volatility in the base market is larger because the market size is much smaller. The 3.8% decrease is then also not statistically significant, meaning that it could be the result of chance. The S market is a lot bigger and uncertainty in the number is lower. The 2.9% is then also a real decrease. Switching to the 991.1 market, we can see an even stronger bottoming pattern after the correction. Base models lost only 0.8% and S is 1.2%. In monetary terms, these numbers amount to $1,000 and $1,700. As you can see, it basically means that prices were stable. Moreover, it occurs from a very gradual bottoming and applies to both the top and the bottom end of the market, increasing the confidence that we can have in these trends.
As you've probably guessed by now, we can see similar, strong trends in the 996 and 997 market.
The 2022 correction in the 997.2S market was relatively small and short compared to other models. Prices have been stable for a longer period. We can see now that prices are up by 1.9% or $2,000. This increase though isn't statistically significant, so it's fair to assume mere stability. As you can see, that fits within the longer trend. Prices for most cars have been hovering around $110,000 to $115,000. The base model is excluded because the market size is too small to get reliable trends. Price trends in the 997.1 market have been stable as well. This applies to both the automatic and the manuals, so the latter segment increased significantly more during 2022. Looking at the developments during last year, we can see that in essence, prices were stable. Automatic prices dropped by 0.1% and the manual ones are up by 3.7%, but none of these changes are statistically confirmed. Moving on to the 996 base models, we can see that this is, unsurprisingly, the king of this segment when it comes to price stability. Prices hardly corrected after the market top, something that's a rarity. Looking at last year, we can see that prices are down by 2.9%. But again, this change isn't statistically significant. This makes sense. We can see that there is some volatility in the trend, but overall it seems to be very flat.
Now the only generation for which price trends aren't flat are of course the 992s. These are still relatively new and the depreciation rates are still higher than what we saw for other generations. Yet, despite the downward trend, the rate itself isn't that high for cars in this segment.
If we look at the price trends broken down by model year, we can see that rates are much lower than during 2022. In the second half of 2022, 2022 S's, 2021 S's, 2022 base models and 2021 base models were falling quickly. In 2023 though, they started to flatten, and this flattening also immediately applied to the 2023 S's. Looking at last year, we can see that base models lost on average 6.3% and S models 6.1%. We'll find out soon that these are respectable numbers.
You see, looking at all of these rates combined, it already becomes clear that the depreciation rate in the turbo market is low.
992s lost the most, but 6.2% on a brand new car is a manageable number. 991.2s lost 3.3%, also a low number. 996s sit at minus 2.7%, but this change isn't statistically significant. As we saw, it could be due to chance. The same applies to the 991.1, 997.1 and 997.2. Depreciation rates are very close to 0%.
The turbo is of course often mentioned as the boring, yet performance-focused choice in this segment. It wins all the drag races and doesn't put a foot wrong. The same basically applies to the depreciation rate.
If we compare it to some competitors, we can see how strong the trends are. We can see, for example, that there's an enormous difference between the trend of the McLaren GT and the 991.2 Turbo S's. The GTs are of course 2 years newer than the turbos, but we can see that the trend of the GT isn't even close to bottoming. They lost 9.7% during last year, 3 times as much as the 911s. If we compare the 991.1 base turbo to the AMG GTC, we can see that, yet again, the turbo has the upper hand. The AMG GTC lost 5.6%, while we saw that 991.1 base turbos lost only 0.8%. Of course, the AMG GTCs are a bit newer. It are then also the youngest cars that are mainly driving this high drop here. One could argue that this comparison is therefore less relevant, but given the similarity in the price levels in 2022, I don't think it's unreasonable. Finally, also if we compare the turbos to the Quattro version of the Performance R8 model, we can see that it does well. The price gap between the R8 Performance and 991.2 Turbo S reduced significantly during 2023 due to the differences in depreciation rate. We can also see that the R8s are dropping slightly quicker than the 992s, even though that the turbos are a bit newer. The R8s lost approximately 8.8% during last year.
Now those were of course only a few examples, but the conclusion also applies if we contextualize the depreciation rate in the turbo market even further and compare it to the general market trend. Turbos are outperforming at the moment.
Over here we have the US year-over-year price changes for almost all cars that feature on my channel. On the horizontal axis we have the price change compared to last year in percentages, and on the vertical axis we have the number of cars to which this change applies. The average decrease during last year was 6.3%, and most cars lost between 11 and 1%. If I plot the average rates for the turbos in here, we can see that all but the 992s lost less than the average, and that some generations belong to the top 25% of cars that lost the least. Also, the 992 result is exceptionally good. Relatively new cars tend to fall on the left hand side of the average, so depreciation by a rate equal to the average is a good result.
Now I think my point is clear, right? The current depreciation rates in the turbo market are extremely low compared to other cars. The question is of course, what drives this?
Is it the increased MSRP, move towards hybrids, or something else? This is a question that's very difficult to answer based on data only.
What we can see in the data though is that the scarcity level in the market is relatively high, meaning that demand could be higher than supply. We cannot measure this directly, but the inventory data gives a good approximation.
Over here we have the carried over inventory. This is the percentage of unsold cars compared to 3 months ago. The higher the number, the longer it takes to sell a car. Looking at the latest developments for the 997, 991 and 992 generations, we can see that the trend has been down during last year. The cars were selling quicker. Moreover, we can see that the absolute values are relatively low. They sit below 35%.
However, they only tell part of the story. Some cars, like the MX-5s, sell much quicker, but they do so because they get discounted quicker and by a much higher rate.
If we look at the price change for the unsold inventory, we can see that turbos have been discounted less and less during 2023 in case that they didn't sell after 3 months. At the moment, they're discounted by 1 to 2% only.
Combining these numbers, we can see that turbos have been selling quicker and quicker, and that sellers have been discounting them less and less in case they didn't sell. They know that there's sufficient demand to sell them without reducing the price too much.
If you want to know more about the inventory dynamics and see how they stack up to other cars, I recommend to have a look at this video. Let's wrap up and conclude now.
In the last few market updates for the Porsche turbos, I've been consistently pointing out the bottoming pattern in the depreciation rate, and the latest data continues to confirm this.
All generations besides the 992 and 991.2s saw flat or close to flat price developments, while 991.2s depreciated only slightly and 992s a bit more, but still by a low rate compared to the rest of the market.
Now all of these trends are of course descriptive, but they do contain some information on the near-term future.
So if you're a buyer waiting on the sidelines for prices to drop, it might be time to reconsider your position.
I'm not saying that turbos can't get any cheaper. Nobody can predict the future. But it would be against the current trend. A trend that, by the way, applies to many of the Porsche markets. Have a look at my channel. Over there you also find market updates for the GT3 and 911 Carreras. Are you looking for a market update of a different car and can't find it on my channel? Let me know the name of the car by commenting it down below in the comment section. Once there are enough requests for a certain car, I'll make a video about it. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you not next week but in 2 weeks for a new video.